Chapter 11. The Lademhof-Lomhater Team-Up Proposal. Entriua Ray, police inspector of the Lune-Biga Criminal Investigation Department, stubbed out his cigarette into the ashtray. The light was already snuffed, but he forced it down like he had some strange vendetta. Feeling a bit better afterward, he finally felt like poking his head into the manager's office. It was a terrible morning. He took that back. It had been nothing but terrible days ever since that lot came a-knocking. Entriua, much like the rest of the citizenry of Clasbiel, couldn't give a toss whether it was the Ov or the united humankind that ruled the universe. None of it affected them. Though it did affect them. Lots. Since they'd inspected the police without notice, traffic was jammed, along with various other inconveniences. Those who worked in suburban farmland and school-going children in the city were getting up very early. Meanwhile, stores were beginning to run out of their wares. Moreover, they were searching every nook and cranny for civilians who dyed their hair blue and diligently shaving their heads, though to what end he had no idea. Even one of Entriua's subordinates got hit. And baldness as a fashion statement was very 3 years ago. Did they know how humiliating it was to be caught in a trend from 3 years ago, particularly for the women? But the worst was how they'd meddled in their regularly scheduled programming. Their right to choose what Holovision program they so desired had been cut back severely. He couldn't watch the next episode in the serial drama he'd been looking forward to, and that had already been distributed to him. The only thing they were allowed to watch was their propaganda. The night prior they'd spent a long time explaining the election system. Entriua knew all about elections. Specifically, he couldn't afford to ignore the election for police commissioner. This general wave of resentment should have been aimed at the occupying forces of the united humankind, but for some reason, the people were airing their grievances at the police. The biggest cause was probably the fact that nobody knew where the occupying army's headquarters were. What a giant pain. Lune-Biga may have seemed small, if judged solely by the urban area where the building trees were located, but the city limits were in fact quite expansive. With those buildings at the center, the city stretched on for a radius of 3,000 ustag. Most of that space was taken up by plantations, but it was dotted by small villages and isolated homes. 80% of the population was so scattered. And that's how big the area of the Lune-Biga police force's jurisdiction was too. Due to the ban on use of airspace and all of the inspections, the police couldn't do their rounds on time. The damned soldiers made no exception for police cars. Worse, they inspected patrol cars especially scrupulously. Every time they left or entered any city, they'd be searched down to the undersides of the seats, so they were hard-pressed to keep watch over the entirety of the city's territory. The Lune-Biga police had already let 4 flagrant offenders get away. They hadn't gotten to the scene on time because they'd been held up by the occupying forces. It is the Criminal Investigation Department's duty to search for offenders who evaded arrest at the scene of the crime. Those soldiers seemed intent on increasing his workload, the bastards. At this rate, their crime-arrest ratio would drop for sure. The only saving grace was that the commissioner's approval rates would also drop. Resentment toward the police themselves was also beginning to bubble to the fore. Processing complaints wasn't in the Criminal Investigation Department's job description, but Entriua had his acquaintances, and they spared no time hammering him with blame. And now this. Police Commissioner Izon had summoned him. They hated each other, so what could this be about? He should have given him 3 days' notice, so he could prepare himself psychologically. "It's me, Entriua," he shouted in front of the door to the commissioner's office. Izon despised crude, loud voices. The door opened. Entriua entered with swinging strides. "Well, if it isn't my little Entriua," said Izon with a fat smile and wheedling voice. Izon being pleased to see him could only portend calamity. Him going out of his way to extend a warm welcome was the most definitive proof there could be that a disaster was unfolding. There with them was another visitor to the commissioner's office, a young man who seemed the sociable sort on first blush. Were it not for the army fatigues that had become an eyesore to him these days, he'd have had no reason to feel any antipathy. "This here's Entriua, one of Criminal Investigation's finest inspectors. Entriua, meet Kite, military police lieutenant of the UH Peacekeepers." Kite extended a hand. "Nice to meet you, Inspector." Entriua stared at that hand dubiously. What was all of this about? Kite smiled broadly. Oh, sorry, that was rude of me. This is how people greet each other here, right? He said, clasping his hands in front of his chest. Seeing that beaming grin, Entriua felt the urge to pat his head and go attaboy. An urge he suppressed as he returned the gesture. Sure, nice to meet you, Lieutenant, he said curtly. Then he faced Izan. So, what VA you got for me? Though he already had a decent guess, the peacekeepers would be subsuming criminal investigations and ordering them around. Now, a commissioner with any pride would have brushed aside that kind of demeaning demand. But this was Izan, so Entriua couldn't be so optimistic. After all, their occupiers had detained politicians and high-level bureaucrats, and though Izan was nothing more than the commissioner of a small city if he displeased the army, they'd spare a thought or two as to a good use for the remaining vacant cells of the planet's jails. Not that Entriua would care in the slightest. He hoped they threw the bastard in a filthy, damp, sunless cell so cramped he couldn't take a single step. Please sit, Entriua, my lad. You too, Lieutenant. Izan pointed at the ottomans. They were arranged in a circle. Entriua took a seat. The chair's legs were short, so he had to stretch his own legs out in front. Would you care for some peppermint tea, Lieutenant? Asked Izan. Sounds good. Thank you, he replied smilingly. Without asking for Entriua's preference, Izan ordered the group 3 cups of peppermint. Soon, the set of 3 cups rose gradually from the center of the circle of chairs. Entriua wasn't thirsty. He left the cup be and instead watched with irritation as the other 2 commenced sipping. You want to tell me what I'm here for, or what? I'm busy, you know. There's no need to get upset, Entriua. I agree with the inspector, said Kite, to his surprise. Time is of the essence. At that, Izan nodded readily. I see. Well, my lad, as it turns out, the lieutenant will be cooperating with us. What? Entriua had guessed wrong. The soldiers occupying Classbuel helping us? We're not occupying anything. We're liberating Classbuel, said Kite. I don't know if your translator's on the fritz or if my dictionary's got a misprint, but that's the first time I've heard the word liberated used that way. We've liberated you from the tyranny of those disgusting homunculi, the off. We've come to spread the word about democracy, he waxed sonorously. Oh, I know democracy. It was the will of the people that put Commissioner Izan in office. And he wanted nothing more than to take democracy by the collar and share a few choice words with it. That was slave democracy, without any of its true substance. Your leaders accepted of rule as a face of life. Yet if they'd been operating by the will of the people, they would have taken a stand against the yoke of oppression. You mean Senator Kindi? Entriua shook his head. I've always voted Democratic, but the man's a good egg, Liberal Party member or not. That's just it. The very idea that parties with Democratic or Liberal in their names exist on a planet conquered by the Ov is a mockery of genuine democracy. So that justifies throwing them in jail? They're not jails. They're democracy re-education camps. The hell is that? A euphemism for concentration camps. They're camps for education. Schools, just as the name implies. Uh-huh. Entriua raised an eyebrow. Then why's nobody signing up for the bloody things? No getting belligerent, Entriua. Izan butted in nervously. Faye. Damned coward. Here the police were getting swallowed up by outsiders, but the commissioner was too scared of re-education to do a thing about it. Kite kept calm. It's fine, Commissioner. These are misunderstandings we knew would come up. And clearing them up is our mission. You're young, but you've got a good head on your shoulders, lauded Izan. Their little spat had strengthened Entriua's impression of Kite as a good guy. But in his eyes, there were 2 types of good guy, passive and proactive. Passive types were great. The only people gratified by proactive types like Kite, on the other hand, were themselves. Proactive types loved pointing out problems that people were living just fine without solving. Those problems, meanwhile, had never been thought of as such, which led to the dismay of the previously untroubled. Then Mr. Do-Gooder rolls into the tangled mess he caused and gallantly lends a hand. Once the person who'd been helped in this way snapped out of it, they usually found themselves worse off than before. What happened to time being of the essence, said Entriua. And what exactly do you mean, you'll be cooperating with us? Somehow I doubt the lieutenant is going to be working under me. I think you're being rather rude, Aizan chided. No, the inspector has every right to be suspicious. Allow me to lay it all out for him. You're ever so kind, said Entriua bitingly. We'll be cooperating on a specific case. Yesterday, 3 citizens of this town were injured, and their car stolen. We're very, very interested in this incident. Well, that's a very, very blah case to be so interested in. Obviously, there was more to this thing. What's the case number? 08-337-8404, answered Aizan. Entriua connected the telephonic line to the police information. He picked out the case in question and displayed it on the monitor. So, these 3 were the victims, huh? He'd known their names already. And Entriua could only laugh upon skimming through their testimonies. They were attacked after offering help to a boy and girl in trouble on the road? What's so funny about that? Kite cocked his head inquiringly. They're a notorious bunch around here. In fact, they've been putting more work on our plates since they were brats. May I offer you some advice? If you want to up your popularity, you ought to round them up and get a firing squad to execute them in public. They're minors, so we're forced to handle them with kid gloves. You're telling me these numbskulls suddenly turned over new leaves? If you ask me, they made a pass at the girl, things got physical, and the 2 fought back. Because if their testimonies are true, then we've got bigger news in this one case than the occupation of Klasbule. The liberation of Klasbule, said Kite earnestly. Entriua ignored the remark. So, why the interest in this case anyway? Take a closer look. The girl spoke Baranu and was as beautiful as an Ov. Yeah, I read that part. You can't take them at their word, though. They're not exactly the brightest of bulbs. I don't even know if they could distinguish between Baranu and birdsong. Besides, to them, there are only 2 types of females, the Smeks and Uggos, with 2/3 of all ladies falling under the Smeks. So their eye for beauty can't exactly home in on a bona fide Ov, if you catch my drift. But what about the boy? They said he looked average and that he spoke the local language, if imperfectly. They must have been an Ov woman and her lame, imperial citizen attendant. What was this Ov of yours doing trudging down the road? Asked Entriua, far from convinced. That's the one thing I can't picture an Ov doing. I've always thought their lot get antsy when they get dirt on their soles. Well, this is nothing more than a hypothesis, but an Empire landing hole was discovered not far from the scene of the crime. My superiors in the Army of Liberation are seeing that as a sign the 2 events are linked. You sure like flapping your gums, don't you? Long story short, you're trying to say the 2 were in that ship. I'm saying there's a high possibility that's the case. It's true that the girl might not be Ov, but it's worth looking into. Please, let us aid in the search. In exchange, we ask only that you hand the criminals over to us. Hold your horses. We're talking aggravated burglary here. That's a serious offense. And you want us to just hand them over? About that, said Aizan. We've already come to an agreement. You don't get a say in this. Of course, Commissioner, Entriua shrugged. Then you're on board. Kite smiled. Because I'm forced to be, said Entriua, as he glanced at the column with the person in charge of the case data. It's being handled by Assistant Inspector BC Kunin's team. Let's hurry up and get you acquainted. He didn't like this. BC Kunin was already still chasing a backlog of more than 3 years' worth of burglaries and murders, with 3 fresh incidents on his lap at the moment. Now he'd have to pursue this one case full-time for the time being. Forget that, said Aizan, who was likewise less than keen to push it on BC Kunin. You'll be heading this case, Entriua. Me? He had a hunch this would happen, but he feigned being taken aback. That's right, lad. Team up with Lieutenant Kite and find them. Naturally, you can use as many deputies as you like. We aim to arrest these criminals with the Lune Biga police force's whole power. Wait a second, Commissioner. That'd only tie the investigation up. You might not be too clear on what goes down at crime scenes, but I've got my own job to do. And inspectors heading up investigations is a common occurrence. Yeah, for big cases. And this case isn't big. It involves the Aku, the liberating army. This is what Entriua and most of the other officers hated about Aizan. He paid about as much attention to the force's putative neutrality as he did clipping his overlong nails, swayed as he was by outside opinion. He'd made a mess of the organization through his focus not on case-by-case level of importance, but on what the press would make of things. He wouldn't complain as much if they were given an organizational structure that enabled them to be flexible in their responses. But in reality, the commissioner had been obsessed with budget cuts due to the climate in Parliament, and thereby reduced the force down to a husk of skin and bones. To top it all off, he then had the nerve to issue unreasonable order after unreasonable order. That, however, was what endeared him to his constituency, and as a consequence, he'd held the office for a long while. There's something I still don't get. What you want is the oven cuffs, right? Entriua asked Kite. We mustn't forget the imperial citizen. He was born a free man, and yet he aided their tyranny. He is an odious lout. The lame, whatever. There are so many of you people around, though. What's the point of enlisting the police force of a country town like this? Entriua, the lieutenant, is helping us. Can we drop the cockamamie pretext, Commissioner? How many people have you got under you, Lieutenant? Kite threw out his chest. I'm an officer who's been cleared to work solo. In other words, you haven't got anyone under you. Entriua looked at Izon with arms outstretched. See, Commissioner? There's no room for debate anymore. I'm no donkey, you can't take me for a ride. This is a big opportunity for all of you, Inspector, he said in fevered tones. Under ordinary circumstances, I'd have liked to ask for the help of the local police to unmask slave Democrats as well. Working alone, we aren't very knowledgeable as to this planet's state of affairs. Unfortunately, those servile traitors of humanity can't be sentenced as such under Clausbiel law, and even worse, they were people's neighbors, so I'm sure there would be resistance to the mission even amongst you. This incident is different. In this case, they are indisputably criminals. Entriua understood where he was going with this and got straight to it. It's our job to apprehend them, yes. But where's the big opportunity? Kite lowered his voice. It's your chance to contribute to true democracy. This is between us, but some of my higher-ups are of the opinion that the police force should be replaced wholesale. They say it was state violence on behalf of the slave democracy. But here you have an opportunity to show them there's a possibility you can be rechristened as a democratic organization. All you need to do is align your goals with ours. Oh, gee, thanks a ton. But are you sure that isn't just your own bag? Don't be absurd. On the contrary, the opinion that we should seek cooperation with pre-existing administrative structures enjoys rather broad support. The Supreme Commander is also of that belief. And depending on your police force's actions, that prevailing opinion can turn into policy. Surely you see now, Entriua, said Izon with a triumphant look. Through our conduct, we have to make an appeal for the very existence of the police. I'd love to appeal your existence, Entriua thought bitterly. I have an idea. Why don't you do it, Commissioner? He suggested, but when he saw Izon give it serious consideration, he immediately took it back. If he let the Commissioner head the case, he'd feel bad for his junior officers. Okay, I'll head the search. Bridling his indignation, Entriua lit himself a smoke. What is that? Asked Kite. You don't know about tobacco, he shot back sullenly. Oh, is that what that is? So it's legal here. Of course. I'm a guardian of the law and this is a police building. In our society, tobacco has been banned for over 200 years. That right? Guess they've got anti-smoking proponents all over. This little guy's totally safe, though. Doesn't even smell. It's like medicine, soothes the nerves and such. That medicinal effect is the problem, said Kite guilelessly. It's unethical to suppress the mind using drugs. The fact that this planet was forced to legalize such unethical drugs just goes to show how extreme the slave democracy's oppression truly was. It's our responsibility as the Liberation Army to eliminate the drugs themselves, as well as the reasons people have taken a liking to them. That's so. Entriua took a deep drag. I hope you've realized, Military Police Lieutenant Kite, that with those words, you've just made me into a reactionary for slave democracy.